Hello and welcome to Chapter 2 of our course on gait analysis and digging deeper into the details of gait analysis. Let's start by discussing the phases of gait. Before diving into the details of gait phases, it is important to understand the definition of gait, or a gait cycle. Gait is a form of bipedal locomotion that involves alternating movements of the two lower extremities, resulting in forward movement of the body. While there are many definitions of a gait cycle, they all share the same basic idea. Now let's take a closer look at the gait cycle from a deeper perspective. Most of the time when we discuss gait cycle, we focus on one leg at a time. For example, let's take a look at the right leg of my friend. If we look closely, we will see that there is a moment in the cycle where the right foot is in contact with the ground, followed by another moment where the foot is off the ground. From the moment the right foot contacts the ground until the last moment when the tips of our toes leave the ground, this interval of time is called the stance phase. On the other hand, from the moment the right leg is off the ground until the moment it contacts the ground again is called the swing phase. Okay, let's look at the stance phase itself and try to break it down more into subphases. We now know that generally the stance phase is all the interval of time where any part of one foot is in contact with the ground. But if we look closely, we can see that we can divide this phase into pieces, as each subphase has a certain characteristic or shape. The first event, or the very first moment of contacting the floor with our heels, is called initial contact. This is also known as heel contact. Initial contact is considered the instant our heels touch the floor. After this event, we start to lower our foot bit by bit until the entire plantar aspect of our foot is in full contact with the ground. This period of time is called loading response, also known as foot flat. This corresponds to the instant the entire plantar surface of the foot comes into contact with the ground. Following that comes mid-stance. Mid-stance is most often defined as the point at which the body's weight passes directly over the supporting lower extremity. In other words, all our body becomes vertical and is represented by a straight line with our body weight centered over the supporting lower extremity. It is also defined as the time when the left foot of the lower extremity in the swing phase passes the right lower extremity that is in the stance phase. Following mid-stance comes terminal stance. It is the period of time where our heel starts to leave the ground, but our toes are still on the ground. The last subphase of the stance phase is pre-swing. It is the period where our toes start to leave the ground, but the tips of our toes are still in contact with the ground. In other words, the proximal and intermediate phalanges and most of the distal phalanges are off the ground, but the tips of the distal phalanx are still on the ground. Because the instant the tips of our toes leave the ground, this marks the beginning of the swing phase, because no part of our foot is now in contact with the floor. Let's move on to the swing phase, which is much simpler than the stance phase as it is divided into three subphases only. The first subphase is called the initial swing, and it occurs from the moment we leave the ground until both of our feet are side by side or at the same line. After the initial swing comes the mid-swing, which represents the period from when both our feet are side by side until our right tibia is vertical to the floor. Tibia is vertical means that there is a 90-degree angle between the tibia and floor. The last subphase of the gait cycle is the terminal swing, which occurs from the moment our right tibia is vertical until the last moment before our following heel contact. After we've finished a complete gait cycle, let's do a quick recap of the main features of each subphase of the gait. First, there is the initial contact or heel strike, which represents the very first moment of contacting the floor. Next comes the loading response, or foot flat, which represents the period of time when our plantar aspect of our foot is in contact with the ground. Then there is the mid-stance subphase, which occurs when all of our body is aligned and centered on the stance foot. After that, there is the terminal stance, where our heels are off the ground. Following that, there is the pre-swing, where our toes are off the ground except for the tips, which are still in contact with the ground. The moment the tips leave the ground marks the start of the initial swing subphase, which continues until both our feet are on the same line. Next, there is the mid-swing subphase, which occurs from when our feet are adjacent until the right tibia is vertical to the floor. Finally, there is the terminal swing subphase, which starts from when the right tibia is vertical until just before the following initial contact. In conclusion, understanding the different phases of gait cycle is crucial for anyone interested in human movement. From the initial contact or heel strike to the terminal swing subphase, each subphase plays an important role in the overall gait cycle. Okay, from the previous, we now know the subphases of each phase of the gait cycle. But regarding the stance phase, we can still divide it from a different perspective. The perspective of the relationship between the two extremities with each other. I want you to focus now on both legs. If you look closely, you can see that at the first contact with the right leg, the left leg is also on the ground, which is called the initial double support period. During this time, both feet are in contact with the ground, providing stability and balance as the body's weight is transferred from one foot to the other. Moving on from the loading response of the right leg and into mid-stance, you will find that as you reach mid-stance, the left foot is now in swing and not on the floor. This is called the single limb support period. During single limb support period, only one foot is in contact with the ground. In this example, the right leg, while the other foot is in its swing phase being advanced forward. The supporting limb now goes through mid-stance and terminal stance while our left leg is still in swing. The moment your right leg moves to pre-swing, the left leg strikes the ground, which is considered opposite initial contact. So, to sum up the single and double support periods during the stance phase. When the right foot is in initial contact and loading response, the other leg is in its late stance phase and still on the ground, which is the initial double support period. Then the right foot moves into mid-stance and terminal stance at the same time that the opposite leg is in the swing phase. The moment you move from terminal stance into pre-swing, the left leg finished the swing phase and contacts the floor to mark the second double limb support period. We hope this video has provided you with a better understanding of the normal phases of the gait cycle. By learning about these phases, you can better understand how our bodies move and how to improve the patient movement pattern and to diagnose and point out the abnormalities in a patient's gait. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us at a1iastmtools@gmail.com. Thank you and see you in the next chapter.